The gunshots rang out across the dusty main street of Willow Creek, Montana. But it wasn't outlaws causing the commotion, it was Beatrice Porter, standing atop the general store's porch roof, firing her father's revolver at the church bell while laughing wildly in her torn Sunday dress. "Get down from there, Beatrice," Sheriff Walton bellowed, his face red with fury beneath his gray mustache. "Your father would be rolling in his grave. My father never told me what to do when he was alive, and he sure ain't starting now." Beatrice shouted back, her chestnut hair whipping in the summer breeze of 1876. At 22, she'd earned quite the reputation in their small frontier town troublemaker, hell-raiser, unladylike, but the word most often whispered behind fans and in the saloon was wild. The townspeople had gathered, as they always did when Beatrice caused a scene. Women clutched their children close, men shook their heads disapprovingly, and Reverend Thompson muttered prayers under his breath. None dared approach her when she was like this, armed and unpredictable as a cornered coyote. "Someone fetch her down before she hurts herself or someone else," Mrs. Abernathy cried, clutching her handkerchief to her mouth. From the edge of the crowd, Frederick Keller watched with quiet interest, one boot propped against the hitching post. New to Willow Creek, having arrived just yesterday to deliver cattle to the railroad, he'd heard plenty about the infamous Beatrice Porter before he'd even set eyes on her. The daughter of a wealthy rancher who died the previous winter, leaving her alone with a fortune and no supervision, she'd been raising hell ever since. "Does no one in this town know how to handle a spirited woman?" Frederick mused aloud, straightening his tall frame from the post. "You think you can do better, Cowboy?" Sheriff Walton challenged. Recognizing Frederick from their brief meeting the day before, Frederick adjusted his Stetson, his blue eyes never leaving the wild-eyed woman on the roof. "I reckon I can." With confident strides, he approached the general store, ignoring the warnings from the townsfolk. His spurs jingled with each step, and he removed his hat as he looked up at Beatrice. "Miss Porter," he called, his voice carrying the distinct drawl of Texas. "Mind if I join you up there?" "The view must be spectacular." Beatrice paused mid-shot, genuinely surprised by the unexpected approach. Most men either scolded her or propositioned her. None had ever asked to join her mischief. "And who might you be?" she asked, the revolver still dangling from her finger. "Frederick Keller, madam, trail boss from the Double Creek outfit. I'd shake your hand, but you seem to have the high ground advantage at present." A small smile tugged at Beatrice's lips. "You planning to talk me down, Mr. Keller, save the wild woman from herself?" "Not at all. I was thinking you might want to try a better vantage point for shooting that bell. Your aim's a bit off from this angle." His tone held no judgment, only matter-of-fact observation. Beatrice studied him for a long moment, then let out a laugh. "You're either the bravest or the foolest man in Montana territory." "I've been called both, Miss Porter, sometimes in the same breath." He grinned, revealing a dimple in his left cheek. Something about his easy confidence intrigued her. He wasn't afraid of her like the others. "Well then, Mr. Keller, what do you suggest?" "I suggest you come down from there before you break your pretty neck. Then, if you still feel like shooting, I know a place where you can fire all day without scandalizing the good people of Willow Creek." Beatrice considered his proposal, then nodded slowly. "All right, Cowboy, you've piqued my interest." She moved to the edge of the roof, suddenly realizing the predicament of her descent. Her bravado had gotten her up there in a fit of rebellion, but coming down in a ladylike fashion while wearing a dress presented challenges she hadn't considered. Frederick recognized her dilemma immediately. He moved to his horse, a tall buckskin gelding tied nearby, and led him to the edge of the porch. "May I offer you a ride, Miss Porter?" The crowd watched in stunned silence as Frederick guided his horse beneath the roofline. Standing in the stirrup, he reached up toward Beatrice. "Trust me," he said quietly, for her ears alone. Something in his steady gaze made her believe him. She tucked the revolver into her boot and took his outstretched hand. With surprising strength, he helped her slide onto his saddle, then settled himself behind her. Hold tight, he whispered, and with a click of his tongue he turned the horse away from the astonished crowd, riding at a walk down the main street with Beatrice Porter perched on his saddle while he himself walked beside the horse, one hand on the reins, the other steadying her. Sheriff Walton stepped forward. "Now see here, Keller, I'll have her back safe and sound before sundown, Sheriff," Frederick called over his shoulder. "On my honor." The sheriff hesitated, then stepped back. If this stranger could calm Beatrice Porter without gunfire or tears, perhaps it was best to let him try. As they moved away from town, Beatrice felt her heart racing in a way that had nothing to do with her earlier recklessness. "Where exactly are you taking me, Mr. Keller?" "Somewhere you can be wild without consequence," he replied, his eyes meeting hers with an understanding that made her breath catch. "And please, call me Frederick." The late afternoon sun cast long shadows as they traveled along a winding creek, leaving the town far behind. Frederick walked steadily beside his horse, occasionally glancing up at Beatrice to ensure she was comfortable. "You could ride up here with me," she suggested after they'd gone about a mile. "There's plenty of room." Frederick shook his head. "A lady deserves a proper seat, Miss Porter." "Beatrice," she corrected him. "And I think we've established I'm not much of a lady." He stopped the horse and looked up at her, his expression serious. "Is that what you believe, or just what they've told you?" The question caught her off guard. No one had ever asked her that before. "I'm not sure," she admitted, suddenly feeling vulnerable under his perceptive gaze. "Well, Beatrice," he said, resuming their journey. "I've known many women in my travels, proper society ladies in San Francisco, hardy ranchers' wives in Colorado, even a few dance hall girls in Dodge City, and I've learned that being a lady has little to do with how quiet you are or how well you pour tea." "What does it have to do with then?" she asked, genuinely curious. "Knowing your own mind, standing by your convictions, and perhaps," he added with a slight smile, "knowing when to shoot church bells and when to find better targets." A laugh bubbled up from deep within her, freer and more genuine than she'd felt in months. "You're not like anyone I've met in Willow Creek, Frederick Keller." "I should hope not. Would be ashamed to come all this way just to be like everyone else." They continued along the creek until the landscape opened into a small, secluded valley. A natural rock formation created a perfect backstop against one side, and the rippling water provided a soothing soundtrack. "Here we are," Frederick announced, helping Beatrice down from the horse. His hands lingered at her waist, perhaps a moment longer than necessary, but she found she didn't mind. "It's beautiful," she said, taking in the peaceful setting. "How did you find this place so quickly? You only arrived yesterday." "First thing I do in a new territory is explore the lay of the land," he explained, unsaddling his horse to let the animal graze. "Helps to know where you can retreat to when civilization becomes too civilized." Beatrice smiled at that. "Is that why you approached me today?" "You recognized a kindred spirit retreating from civilization." Frederick considered her question as he arranged some empty cans he'd brought in his saddlebag on a fallen log. "I recognized someone who wasn't being seen for who she really is," he said finally, "and that's a lonely place to be." His insight struck her deeply. Since her father's death, she'd been acting out more and more, partly from grief, partly from the sudden freedom of having no one to answer to. But the more outrageous her behavior became, the more the townspeople distanced themselves, creating a cycle she couldn't seem to break. "So you appointed yourself my savior?" she asked, a defensive edge creeping back into her voice. "Not at all," he replied calmly, finishing his setup of the makeshift shooting range. "I appointed myself as someone who might understand. There's a difference." He handed her the revolver she'd tucked into her boot earlier. "Now, if you still feel like shooting something, these cans won't scandalize anyone." Beatrice took the gun, weighing it in her hand. "My father taught me to shoot when I was 12, she said quietly. "Said a woman alone on the frontier needed to protect herself. After he died, it felt like one of the few connections I still had to him." Frederick nodded, not offering platitudes or judgment, just listening. But I know shooting the church bell was foolish, she admitted. I just wanted to feel something besides this emptiness. Grief has its own timeline, Frederick said, and its own ways of expressing itself. He stepped behind her, gently adjusting her stance. Keep your arms steady, eyes on your target. Breathe in, then squeeze as you exhale. The closeness of him sent an unexpected warmth through her body. His chest nearly touched her back, and she could smell leather, horses, and something distinctly male about him. Beatrice took aim and fired, knocking a can clear off the log. The satisfaction of the clean shot surged through her. "Well done," Frederick praised. "You're a natural." For the next hour, they took turns shooting, Frederick showing her tricks he'd learned during his years on the frontier. She proved to be an excellent student, hitting targets that even he found challenging. As the sun began to sink lower, painting the valley in golden hues, they sat by the creek, sharing jerky and biscuits from Frederick's provisions. "You never said why you're in Willow Creek," Beatrice noted, dipping her bare feet in the cool water. "Delivering cattle to the railroad like I mentioned," he replied, leaning back on his elbows. "But I'm also scouting land, thinking of putting down some roots after 15 years of driving herds across every territory from Texas to Montana." 15 years. "You can't be that old," she observed, studying his face. Though weathered by sun and wind, he couldn't be much past 30. "Started young," he explained. "Left home at 16 after my ma died. Pa had already been gone 3 years by then, figured I had nothing keeping me in one place." Beatrice recognized the familiar pain in his voice. "And now you want to stay put? A man gets tired of sleeping under stars every night, beautiful as they are." He glanced at her. "Gets to thinking about what it might be like to have something of his own, someone to come home to." The implication hung in the air between them, neither acknowledging it directly. "My father's ranch is just sitting there," Beatrice said after a moment. 5,000 acres, good water rights. I don't know the first thing about running it properly." "Why not sell it?" Frederick asked. She shook her head. "It's all I have left of him, of my family." She picked up a stone and skipped it across the water. "But sometimes I think about leaving anyway, going somewhere no one knows me or has expectations about how I should behave." "Running away rarely solves the problem," he said gently. "It just gives you new problems in a new place." "Is that why you're finally stopping? Tired of new problems?" Frederick chuckled. "Something like that, or maybe I finally found a place worth staying for." Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them. Beatrice felt a flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with rebellion or wildness. It was something quieter, deeper, more frightening. "We should head back," Frederick said, breaking the moment. "I promised the sheriff I'd have you home by sundown." As they prepared to leave, Beatrice felt a strange reluctance. "Will I see you again?" she asked, trying to sound casual. "I'll be in town for at least a week," he replied, helping her onto his horse. "Plenty of time for more shooting lessons if you're interested." "I'd like that," she said, smiling as he once again walked beside the horse, leading them back toward town. The return journey was filled with easy conversation. Frederick told her stories of his travels, stampedes in Kansas, blizzards in Wyoming, the characters he'd met along the way. Beatrice shared memories of growing up on her father's ranch, of the mother she barely remembered, of her dreams before grief had consumed her. As they approached the outskirts of Willow Creek, Beatrice felt a sense of dread creeping in. "They'll all be watching," she murmured, "waiting to see if the wild Porter girl has been tamed." Frederick stopped the horse and looked up at her. "You don't need taming, Beatrice. Maybe just someone who sees your wildness for what it is, strength, not something to be ashamed of." His words washed over her like a balm. For the first time in months, perhaps years, she felt truly seen. "Thank you," she whispered, meaning it more deeply than he could know. They entered town as the last rays of sunlight painted the buildings in amber. As predicted, curious faces peered from windows and porches, but Frederick paid them no mind, walking proudly beside his horse with Beatrice sitting tall in the saddle. He guided them to her father's grand house at the edge of town, a two-story structure that stood as a testament to Jacob Porter's success in life, if not in raising a daughter alone. "Here we are, safe and sound as promised," Frederick said, helping her down from the horse. Standing on her porch, Beatrice suddenly felt shy. "Would you like to come in for coffee? Mrs. Holloway, my housekeeper, makes a fresh pot every evening." Frederick removed his hat, turning it in his hands. "I'd like that very much, but perhaps another time." People talk in small towns, and a lady's reputation is a fragile thing. Though disappointed, Beatrice appreciated his consideration. "Tomorrow, then, we could ride out to the ranch. I could show you the land." "I'll call for you at 10, he agreed, his smile warming his blue eyes. "If that suits you, it does." He placed his hat back on his head and turned to go, then paused. "Beatrice?" "Yes. Next time you feel like shooting something, come find me first," she laughed, the sound carrying on the evening breeze. "I'll hold you to that, Frederick Keller." As she watched him ride away, Beatrice felt something shifting inside her. The wildness was still there, it always would be, but for the first time, it felt less like a burden and more like a gift waiting to be properly understood. True to his word, Frederick arrived precisely at 10 the next morning, riding his buckskin and leading a gentle mare for Beatrice. She was waiting on the porch, dressed in practical riding clothes rather than the fashionable dresses she usually wore to provoke the town's disapproval. "You look ready for a proper ride," Frederick commented approvingly. "These were my everyday clothes when my father was alive," she explained as they set off toward the Porter ranch. "Somehow after he died, I stopped wearing what was comfortable and started wearing whatever would cause the most commotion." Frederick nodded thoughtfully. "Sometimes when we're hurting, we want everyone else to feel as uncomfortable as we do." They rode side by side through rolling hills covered in summer grass, the kind that cattle fattened on nicely. Beatrice pointed out landmarks: the creek that never ran dry even in drought years, the stands of pine that provided shelter for livestock in winter storms, the distant mountains that marked the boundary of Porter land. "Your father chose well," Frederick observed as they stopped to rest the horses on a ridge overlooking the valley. "This is prime ranching country." "He came here with nothing but a wagon and a dream in '52, Beatrice said proudly. "Built everything from the ground up." Her expression clouded. "And now it's all falling apart because I don't know how to maintain it." Frederick surveyed the property with a professional eye. Indeed, signs of neglect were evident: fences in need of repair, fields that should have been cleared of brush, outbuildings with missing shingles. "Land is forgiving if you start giving it attention again," he said. "Nothing here that can't be fixed with time and hard work." They continued to the main ranch house, a sturdy log structure larger than most in the territory. Several bunkhouses stood empty nearby, testimony to the ranch hands who had sought work elsewhere after Jacob Porter's death. "Pa kept 20 men on year-round," Beatrice explained as they dismounted. "After the funeral, I didn't know how to manage them. Most left within a month." Inside the house, everything was covered in a fine layer of dust. Beatrice moved through the rooms with a mixture of nostalgia and shame. "I haven't been out here in nearly 3 months," she admitted. "Too many memories." Frederick followed her silently, taking in the quality furnishings that spoke of Jacob Porter's success and taste. Family portraits lined the walls: Beatrice as a little girl with her parents, then just with her father as she grew older, her mother noticeably absent. "She died of fever when I was 4, Beatrice explained, seeing him study the progression. "I barely remember her." In Jacob Porter's study, leather-bound ledgers sat unopened on a massive oak desk. Frederick ran his fingers along their spines. "These would tell the story of the ranch," he said. "Production records, breeding information, grazing rotations, everything you'd need to keep operations running smoothly." Beatrice nodded miserably. "I tried to make sense of them after he died. The numbers swam before my eyes. I've never had a head for figures." Frederick picked up one of the ledgers and flipped through it. "Your father was methodical, that's good, makes it easier to understand his system." He glanced at her. If you wanted to learn, that is. Are you offering to teach me? She asked, a spark of hope in her eyes. I could, he said carefully. If you're serious about wanting to keep this place going. Beatrice sat heavily in her father's chair. I don't know what I want anymore. For months I've just been existing, causing trouble because it was easier than facing reality. She looked up at him. What would you do if you were me? Frederick considered her question seriously. I'd remember why this land mattered to my father. I'd honor his memory by at least trying to preserve what he built. He paused. But I'd also ask myself if this is the life I truly want, or if I'm just holding on out of obligation. His honest answer struck a chord. How did you get so wise for a cowboy? She asked with a small smile. Lots of time under the stars to think, he replied. And plenty of mistakes to learn from. They spent the rest of the day exploring the ranch, Frederick noting what needed immediate attention and what could wait. By late afternoon, they had compiled a substantial list of repairs and tasks. It's overwhelming, Beatrice admitted as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the land in gold and crimson. Rome wasn't built in a day, Frederick reminded her. Neither was the Porter Ranch. Start small, build momentum. She said suddenly. Pardon, you said start small. But if I'm going to do this, I need help. She turned to face him fully. You said you're looking to put down roots. Would you consider staying on, managing the ranch with me? Frederick was clearly taken aback by the offer. Beatrice, that's a mighty big proposition to make to someone you've known for 2 days. I know, she acknowledged. It sounds impulsive, but I'm not offering this lightly. You know ranching. You understand the land. And, she added softly, you're the first person since my father who's really seen me instead of just my behavior. The honesty in her words touched him deeply. I'm honored by your trust, he said, but such arrangements need careful consideration, for both our sakes. Of course, she said, feeling foolish for rushing. Take all the time you need. Frederick smiled gently. How about this? I'll help you get started on the most pressing repairs while I'm in town. We'll see how we work together. If it feels right for both of us after that, we can discuss a more permanent arrangement. Relief flooded through her. That sounds perfect. As they rode back to town in the gathering dusk, Beatrice felt a lightness she hadn't experienced since before her father's death. For the first time in months, she had something to look forward to besides scandalizing the townsfolk. Over the next week, Frederick became a regular visitor at the Porter Ranch. He hired local men to help with fence repairs and recruited a carpenter to fix the leaking roof on the main house. Beatrice worked alongside them, learning skills her father had never taught her, discovering a satisfaction in physical labor she hadn't expected. In the evenings, they would sit at her father's desk, Frederick patiently explaining the ranch ledgers, teaching her about cattle breeding, winter feed calculations, and market timing. She proved a quick study once she applied herself, her natural intelligence finding purpose in the practical knowledge. The townspeople noticed the change in Beatrice. Gone were the wild outbursts and inappropriate behavior. Instead, she rode through town with purpose, ordering supplies, negotiating with merchants, and even attending church without incident. Never thought I'd see the day, Sheriff Walton remarked to Frederick one afternoon as they passed on the street. Whatever you're doing with that girl, it's working miracles. I'm not doing anything special, Frederick replied honestly, just giving her the respect she deserves. As his week in Willow Creek stretched into 2, Frederick sent a telegram to his employers explaining his delayed return. They were understanding, having already delivered the cattle as contracted. On a warm Sunday afternoon, Frederick and Beatrice sat by the creek where they'd first gone shooting, enjoying a picnic lunch after church. I received a letter yesterday, Frederick said, watching the water flow past. From my former trail boss. The company's offering me a promotion head of cattle operations for their Montana holdings. Beatrice's heart sank. That's wonderful news, she said, forcing enthusiasm into her voice. When would you start? That's the thing, he said, turning to face her. I've been thinking about declining. Hope fluttered in her chest. Why would you do that? It sounds like a fine opportunity. Frederick reached for her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. Because in these 2 weeks, I've found something I never expected to find in Willow Creek. And what's that? She asked softly, though she knew the answer in her heart. A place that feels like home, he said simply. And a woman who makes me want to stay. Beatrice felt tears spring to her eyes. Frederick, let me finish, he said gently. I know it's fast. Too fast, perhaps, by proper standards, but life on the frontier has taught me that tomorrow isn't guaranteed. When you find something worth holding onto, you don't let it slip away. He took a deep breath. I'm not proposing marriage, not yet, that would be presumptuous. But I am proposing a partnership. Let me help you restore the Porter Ranch to what it once was. Let me stay, Beatrice. Joy bubbled up inside her, pure and unrestrained. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I'd like that very much. Their first kiss was gentle, tentative, a promise of deeper feelings yet to be explored. When they pulled apart, Beatrice was smiling through her tears. You know what people will say, she warned. That I've trapped you or that you're after my land, Frederick laughed. Let them talk. We know the truth. Over the following months, the Porter Ranch slowly came back to life under their joint care. Frederick's knowledge of cattle operations proved invaluable, while Beatrice discovered a talent for record-keeping and negotiations that surprised them both. They hired back some of the former hands and brought in new ones, rebuilding the workforce that had once made the ranch prosperous. Frederick moved into one of the bunkhouses, maintaining propriety despite the growing feelings between them. By Christmas of 1876, the transformation was remarkable. The ranch house gleamed with fresh paint and repairs, the herds were growing again, and a sense of purpose had replaced the neglect that had threatened to consume the property. On Christmas Eve, with snow falling gently outside, Frederick and Beatrice sat before the fire in the main house, enjoying mulled cider and each other's company. I have something for you, Frederick said, reaching into his pocket. It's not much, but he handed her a small wooden box. Inside lay a simple gold band with a small diamond that caught the firelight. Frederick, she breathed, looking up at him with wide eyes. Beatrice Porter, he said, taking her hand in his, I've loved you since the day I saw you standing on that roof, wild and unafraid. These past months have only deepened that feeling. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? She didn't hesitate. Yes, she said, her voice strong and certain. 1,000 times yes. They were married on New Year's Day, 1877, in the small church whose bell Beatrice had once used for target practice. The townspeople filled the pews, their former disapproval replaced by genuine good wishes for the couple who had brought the Porter Ranch back from the brink. Sheriff Walton himself gave the bride away, whispering to Frederick as he placed Beatrice's hand in his, You've done right by her, son. Jacob would be proud. As they rode from the church to begin their new life together, Frederick helped Beatrice onto his horse, then mounted behind her, his arms encircling her waist as they cantered down the main street of Willow Creek. Remember the first time we rode like this? Beatrice asked, leaning back against his chest. How could I forget? The wildest woman in Montana, sitting on my saddle while I walked beside you. And now look at us, she said, turning to press a kiss to his jaw. Respectable ranchers, married and everything. Frederick laughed, the sound warm in the winter air. Don't worry, Mrs. Keller, you're still wild enough for me. As they reached the edge of town, he urged his horse into a gallop, and they rode toward their ranch, their home, with the wind in their hair, and the future stretching before them like the endless Montana sky. 5 years later, on a bright spring morning in 1882, Frederick stood on the porch of the Porter Keller Ranch, watching his wife teach their 3-year-old daughter to ride her first pony. Little Emma, named for Beatrice's mother, sat fearlessly on the gentle creature, her laughter carrying across the yard. Beside him, their 1-year-old son Jacob slept peacefully in his cradle, the spitting image of his grandfather in the old portraits. The ranch had prospered beyond their expectations. With careful management and Frederick's innovative breeding programs, they now ran one of the most successful cattle operations in the territory. The Porter Keller brand was known for quality from Montana to Chicago. As Beatrice led Emma and her pony back toward the house, her smile as radiant as ever, Frederick marveled at how his life had changed in 6 short years. From a lonely trail boss with no roots to a husband, father, and respected rancher, all because he'd stopped to help a wild woman on a rooftop. "What are you thinking about, looking so serious?" Beatrice asked as she joined him on the porch, lifting Emma into her arms. "Just counting my blessings," he replied, drawing her close for a kiss. "And thinking that sometimes the wildest choices lead to the truest happiness." Beatrice smiled against his lips. "Well, Mr. Keller, I'd say we're just getting started." And as they stood together, surrounded by the life they'd built, Frederick knew with absolute certainty that Beatrice was right, their greatest adventures were still to come.